For many Brazilians, the image of an aircraft carrier and carrier-borne fighters once symbolized the country's ambition to be a true maritime power in the South Atlantic. The former aircraft carrier São Paulo and the A-4 Skyhawk fighters of the Brazilian Navy were not merely military assets. They represented a particular vision of national prestige, technological aspiration, and blue water capability. Yet history rarely unfolds in straight lines. The end of São Paulo and the continued, carefully limited use of A-4 Skyhawk aircraft tell a deeper story about how Brazil is redefining naval power in a more mature, realistic, and strategically coherent way. The retirement and eventual sinking of São Paulo did not occur because Brazil lost interest in maritime security. Rather, it reflected the conclusion of a strategic cycle that began in a very different geopolitical and economic context. Acquired at the turn of the millennium, São Paulo was intended to preserve carrier aviation skills and to project influence across the South Atlantic. Over time, however, the structural limits of this ambition became increasingly clear. Maintenance costs escalated, availability declined, and the ship depended heavily on foreign industrial support chains that were neither reliable nor affordable over the long term. By the late 2010s, São Paulo had become less a tool of power and more a drain on scarce defense resources. The controversial decision to sink the decommissioned carrier at sea, after repeated failures to find a safe dismantling solution, exposed a rare moment of transparency in Brazilian defense policy. Public debate was intense, especially around environmental concerns. But beneath the controversy lay a deeper recognition that certain symbols had outlived their strategic utility. For a growing segment of Brazilian society, the episode reinforced a hard but necessary lesson. Prestige platforms do not automatically translate into security, and responsible maritime power must balance ambition, sustainability, and cost-effectiveness. Public opinion in Brazil has evolved significantly in this regard. While nostalgia and pride remain strong emotional forces, there is increasing realism about what national defense should prioritize. The São Paulo case highlighted the limits of copying the naval models of major global powers. Brazil's strategic environment is fundamentally different. Its primary maritime challenges involve safeguarding sea lines of communication, protecting offshore energy resources, enforcing sovereignty across an immense exclusive economic zone, and maintaining stability in the South Atlantic. None of these tasks inherently require an aircraft carrier. In contrast, the continued operation of A-4 Skyhawk aircraft illustrates a more nuanced approach to legacy systems. Often criticized as obsolete, these aircraft have survived not because of sentimentality, but because they still serve defined, limited roles within Brazil's naval aviation structure. Used primarily for training, coastal patrol, and specific low-intensity missions, they help preserve institutional knowledge while avoiding the enormous costs of replacing them prematurely. In recent exercises, their adaptation to emerging challenges, such as slow-moving aerial threats, has demonstrated a pragmatic mindset focused on utility rather than symbolism. Importantly, the A-4 Skyhawk no longer represents a carrier-centric doctrine. Its current role is land-based, complementary, and transitional. This distinction matters. Brazil is not clinging to the past. It is managing the present while preparing for a future in which naval aviation is integrated differently into maritime security. For Brazilian audiences, this narrative resonates strongly with broader national themes of resilience, adaptation, and efficiency under constraint. The deeper transformation lies in Brazil's evolving maritime doctrine. The shift away from carrier aviation marks a movement from power projection towards sea control and maritime domain awareness. This approach prioritizes layered surveillance, rapid response, and sustained presence, rather than episodic demonstrations of force. In the South Atlantic, where Brazil's strategic interests are vast, but largely defensive, this model is not a retreat. It is a refinement. Modern naval power does not depend on a single flagship platform. Instead, it emerges from networks of surface combatants, patrol vessels, submarines, helicopters, unmanned systems, and integrated command and control. Brazil's naval planning increasingly reflects this reality. Investments in domestically built ships, maritime patrol capabilities, and industrial self-reliance align defense policy with national development goals. This connection between security and industry is especially important for Brazil, where defense spending must justify itself not only in strategic terms, but also in economic and social impact. Comparisons with other naval powers often miss this point. Brazil does not need to emulate the carrier fleets of the United States, China, or France to be secure or influential. Its strength lies in mastering its own maritime geography and strategic responsibilities. The South Atlantic is not an arena of global naval rivalry, but it is a region of growing economic and geopolitical importance. By focusing on credible control rather than symbolic projection, Brazil positions itself as a stabilizing force rather than a competitor in an arms race it does not need. Looking ahead to the period from 2030 to 2035, the trajectory is clear. Brazil is unlikely to return to aircraft carrier operations in the medium term, not because it lacks ambition, but because its priorities are better served elsewhere. The A-4 Skyhawk fleet will gradually phase out as newer systems take over specific functions, ensuring continuity without abrupt capability gaps. This measured transition reflects institutional learning rather than inertia. What emerges from the stories of São Paulo and the Skyhawk is not decline, but strategic maturity. Brazil has learned to distinguish between prestige and power, between visibility and effectiveness. The country's naval identity is evolving from one centered on iconic platforms to one grounded in sustained presence, regional responsibility, and technological adaptation. This evolution aligns closely with how many Brazilians now view national defense, not as a stage for grand gestures, but as a disciplined exercise in protecting long-term interests. In this sense, the end of São Paulo and the continued, carefully limited use of A-4 Skyhawks are two sides of the same strategic coin. One marks the closure of an era defined by aspiration through emulation. The other represents continuity through pragmatism. Together, they signal a Brazil that is increasingly comfortable defining its own path at sea, guided not by external templates, but by a sober understanding of its geography, resources, and responsibilities in the South Atlantic.